Why was she sitting there in silence, when everyone else on base whispered questions about her? The morning sun carved long shadows across the training grounds. Boots struck gravel. The metallic clink of gear echoed under the steady rhythm of orders barked across the yard. Yet she remained still, Sarah Chen, a civilian among warriors, her hands folded neatly in her lap as if waiting for something only she could sense. No phone, no notebook, no outward sign of purpose. Just her eyes, steady and watchful, tracking every move as if each motion carried weight. Commander Jake Mitchell noticed it again. That silence. That presence. He had seen recruits panic under fire, veterans crumble under pressure, even seasoned officers doubt their orders. But he had never seen a woman sit so quietly in a place where silence felt heavier than any weapon. She wasn't supposed to be there. Not according to his years of training, not according to the tight structure of military life where every name, every face had a file, a reason, a rank. Yet the orders had come directly from the top, Naval Special Warfare Command. Civilian consultant Sarah Chen will observe training exercises. Full cooperation required. No explanation. No context. The men had whispered, of course. They always did. "Is she a shrink?" one asked. "Intel," another muttered. "Spook," someone else suggested, lowering his voice. But Sarah never responded to the curiosity that trailed her every step. She never defended herself, never offered small talk, never leaned into their world. Instead, she seemed to float just outside it, absorbing everything with an intensity that unsettled even the most hardened operators. Mitchell tried to dismiss it, tried to remind himself that orders were orders, but when he looked at her, really looked, something struck him. In her eyes, he saw the same shadow he had once carried after coming home from a mission that went wrong, a weight that didn't belong to civilians. It was the gaze of someone who had stood too close to loss, someone who had buried pieces of themselves in silence because words were never enough. And that unsettled him more than the mystery of her presence. The day's drill began like countless others. Hostage rescue scenario, urban layout, in theory a routine exercise, but Mitchell's instincts, honed over 15 years of service, told him this day would not be routine. "Team Alpha on me," he called. His voice carried its usual calm authority, the kind that made men trust him without question. As the SEALs took positions, Sarah didn't move. She sat on that wooden bench, hair pulled back, posture straight, watching, always watching. Mitchell led his men through the simulation, clearing rooms with practiced precision. He had done it 1,000 times, but today he found himself distracted. He noticed how Sarah's gaze shifted before they moved, how she seemed to anticipate their angles, predict their timing. No civilian should understand tactics that well. When the final room was cleared and the exercise ended, Mitchell gave the all clear. Applause wasn't part of their world. Success was survival, not celebration. Yet today, something in the air felt unfinished. He dismissed his team, but instead of heading straight to debrief, he walked toward the silent figure on the bench. Sarah looked up at him. For a moment, neither spoke. Around them, the base moved with its usual rhythm. Boots pounding, radios cracking, laughter spilling from the younger recruits. But in that small pocket of stillness, it felt as though the world had paused, waiting. "You did well," she said finally, her voice soft, accented in a way Mitchell couldn't quite place. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that lodged deep in his chest. "Your team trusts you completely. That's not something every commander can achieve." Mitchell blinked. He didn't know whether to take it as a compliment, a test, or both. He set his helmet down at his feet and studied her carefully. "Mind if I ask what you're really doing here?" His tone was level, but the question carried an edge sharpened by days of unanswered curiosity. Sarah's eyes shifted toward the obstacle course, where his men were already running post-drill laps. For a long moment, she didn't answer. "Sometimes," she said at last, "the most important missions are the ones that never appear in reports. Sometimes trust has to be built slowly, one step at a time." And with that, she rose from the bench, brushed the dust from her jeans, and started toward the gate. No explanation, no promise, just that one cryptic thought left hanging between them. Mitchell watched her walk away, her figure shrinking against the concrete and steel of the base. And though every instinct told him to demand more, to press for answers, another instinct, one he trusted even more, whispered something else. Trust her. He didn't know why, not yet, but the feeling was stronger than logic, stronger than protocol. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Sarah returned. This time she wasn't dropped off alone. A black sedan rolled onto the base, government plates glinting in the dim light. The driver stayed inside, engine idling, eyes hidden behind dark shades. Mitchell's instincts sharpened. This wasn't routine anymore. During the briefing, a new message came through his secure line. High classification. He had seen the code only a handful of times in his career, always in connection with missions that had changed lives. Begin advanced trust protocols with civilian consultant. Commander Mitchell has full discretion regarding operational security measures. His chest tightened. He knew what that meant. Advanced trust protocols, a phrase reserved for situations where civilian and military cooperation blurred lines of command, where ordinary rules no longer applied. It meant decisions were coming, ones heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. Sarah approached him directly that morning, her steps measured, her gaze steady. "Commander," she whispered, "may I speak with you privately?" He led her away, near the comms building where shadows cast by the early light offered privacy. "I need you to understand," she began, scanning the perimeter like someone trained, not casual. "My presence here isn't random, and it isn't temporary." Mitchell folded his arms. "Then what is it?" "There are situations developing," she said, voice low, "that will require cooperation between military and civilian operations unlike anything attempted before." Her words fell heavy. Cooperation. He had heard that word countless times, but never like this, never with this quiet urgency. "There are people working in shadows," she continued. "People gathering intelligence on threats traditional structures can't reach. Some have knowledge that could prevent catastrophes before they begin." Mitchell studied her face in the glow of the security lamps. He had heard men lie under interrogation. He had seen politicians speak half-truths with confidence. But what he saw in Sarah wasn't deception. It was burden. "And you're one of them," he said. Her eyes didn't flinch. "I am, but trust has to be earned, slowly." He exhaled through his nose, the weight of command pressing against his ribs. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Nothing yet," Sarah replied. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device, unfamiliar even to him. It looked like comms gear, but with something more streamlined, layered with technology beyond standard issue. "This contains information that could save lives, but only if it's used by someone who understands both worlds, military and civilian." Mitchell's fingers itched to take it, to demand answers, but she tucked it back into her jacket before he could. "For now, continue your drills. Let me observe. In time, you'll know whether you can trust me." And then, just like the day before, she walked away, leaving him with more questions than answers. That evening, while his men cleaned weapons and checked gear, Mitchell replayed every word, every gesture. He thought of the black sedan, the orders marked with codes that rarely surfaced, and Sarah's silence, heavier than any explanation. When he closed his eyes, he saw her gaze again, the shadowed look of someone who had already walked through fire, already carried scars invisible to most. And he knew one thing. Whatever this was, whatever she represented, it was only the beginning. Why did the message feel heavier than any weapon he'd ever carried? Mitchell sat at his desk, the encrypted note still glowing on his terminal. "Begin advanced trust protocols." The phrase wouldn't leave him. He'd seen it used only in operations where the rules bent, where traditional structures collapsed under the weight of new realities. Now it was on his shoulders, alone. When he stepped out into the chill pre-dawn air, Sarah was already waiting. Same bench, same silence, but different. This time she wasn't in plain clothes, tactical pants, fitted long-sleeve shirt, her hair tied back sharper, face taut with quiet focus. And he noticed the earpiece, slim, almost invisible, the kind only special operators or intelligence officers wore. It was no longer possible to pretend she was just a civilian. The base hummed awake around them, trucks roared, boots hit gravel, radios cracked with coded chatter, yet Mitchell felt the air bend toward her. His men noticed too, their side glances sharper, whispers carried more urgency. "Who is she?" Rodriguez muttered under his breath as they prepped for night ops training. "She walks like she belongs here, but nobody knows her file. That's not normal, sir." Mitchell only shook his head. "Our job isn't to know, it's to follow orders for now." But his voice lacked conviction. Rodriguez heard it, and Sarah, standing a few feet away, likely heard it too. The day's drill was infiltration under night vision, stealth work. Mitchell had always loved the quiet rhythm of these operations, the muted communication, the ghost-like flow of men who had trained until silence itself became language. But tonight, he couldn't shake the weight pressing down on him. Sarah wasn't just observing anymore. She was here with purpose. Before the exercise began, she approached him directly. "Commander," she whispered, "a moment." Mitchell led her toward the comms building again, shadows stretching long in the floodlights. "I need you to understand something," she said. Her voice was low, but there was steel beneath it. "My presence here isn't about observation. It's about preparation." "Preparation for what?" Her eyes flicked toward the men suiting up with NVGs and rifles. "There are threats your world cannot reach. People who think beyond doctrine, who operate inside systems the military was never trained to understand. They've been moving quietly for years. We've tracked them, infiltrated them, but there are limits to what civilians can do alone. That's why I'm here." Mitchell studied her in the dim light. The confidence in her words wasn't arrogance, it was experience, and buried beneath that, fatigue. "You've seen them," he said, "up close." She nodded once, closer than anyone realizes. "And now I'm supposed to trust you." "No," she replied, her eyes steady on his. "Not yet. That has to be earned. All I'm asking is that you let me keep watching. Let me see how your team works, how you make decisions. When the time comes, trust will decide whether lives are saved or lost." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Mitchell wanted to press her, to demand details. But instinct told him more answers would only come when she chose, and forcing them could shatter something before it began. So he nodded. "For now you observe." The night's exercise unfolded with surgical precision. His men flowed through the mock village, clearing rooms, scaling walls, moving like shadows stitched together by discipline. Mitchell directed from the perimeter, his voice calm, steady. But every time his eyes strayed toward Sarah, he saw something unnerving. She wasn't just watching, she was tracking, predicting their moves. Her gaze shifted seconds before his team executed maneuvers like she already knew what they'd do. No civilian had that instinct. When the drill ended, the men gathered for debrief, sweat dripping from their faces, laughter breaking tension. Mitchell waited until they dispersed before approaching Sarah. "You understand combat strategy," he said. A flicker of a smile tugged at her lips, "enough to survive." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give right now." She paused, studying him. "But I saw something tonight. The way you handled that mistake from your rookie operator. You didn't humiliate him. You kept cohesion intact. That's rare. And it matters." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "You were evaluating me." "I was watching how you lead. Because the missions ahead, they'll require more than tactics. They'll require trust strong enough to hold even when nothing makes sense." For the first time since she'd arrived, emotion cracked her mask. Not much, just a flicker of weariness of weight carried too long, but Mitchell saw it, and it was enough to stir something inside him. That night alone in his quarters he sat in silence, replaying every detail. The black sedan, the earpiece, the words advanced trust protocols. He had led men into fire. He had carried bodies off fields where no flags waved. He had learned to measure risk in lives, not numbers. But never before had he been asked to trust someone without a name, without a record, without a story. And yet his gut, the same instinct that had saved his men more times than he could count, told him to wait, to let the silence play out. At dawn, Sarah was already there. This time she carried something new, a sidearm holstered discreetly at her hip. She didn't flaunt it, didn't draw attention, but Mitchell noticed, and so did his men. Questions spread faster now. Who gave her authorization? What was she hiding? Why would a civilian carry military gear on base? Mitchell gave no answers, because he had none. But when he walked toward her, she stood to meet him, and for the first time her voice carried urgency. "There's been a development," she said, "one that changes everything." Her eyes were sharper now, as if the silence had burned away and left only necessity. "Walk with me." He did, past the drills, past the watchful eyes of his men, toward the edge of the base where a secure building stood that even he rarely entered. Inside the world shifted. No camo, no sandbags, no rifles racked neatly against the wall. Instead screens, maps, real-time feeds of cities hundreds of miles away. Civilians in suits moved like ghosts between terminals, their faces lit by the glow of data streams. And waiting in the center was a woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that didn't waver. "Commander Mitchell," she said, stepping forward. "Director Williams, thank you for your cooperation." Sarah's silence suddenly made sense. This wasn't observation, it was evaluation, and now the curtain was lifting. The walls around them were lined with maps of the West Coast, red dots, connecting lines, targets. "This," Director Williams said, her voice cold and certain, "is the most sophisticated domestic threat analysis we've ever conducted, and we cannot stop it with military or intelligence alone. That's why Sarah is here, and why you are." Mitchell's stomach sank. The maps weren't just projections, they were promises of chaos, civilian locations, transportation hubs, shopping centers, all chosen with surgical precision. Sarah stepped closer, her voice quiet but certain. "They know us better than we know ourselves. They know how we think, how we move, how we respond. To stop them, we need to think differently, act differently, and trust differently." The weight pressed down on Mitchell's chest. He had known this would escalate, but not this fast, not this heavy. "Why me?" he asked finally. Director Williams looked at him with eyes that seemed to measure more than his words. "Because your men follow you without question, and because you're already beginning to trust the one person who can get inside." Her gaze shifted to Sarah, and Mitchell realized that the silence wasn't about mystery anymore. It was about preparation, the kind of preparation that asked him to risk everything he knew for something he didn't yet understand. The kind that whispered, "This isn't about drills anymore, this is real." How do you trust someone who's lived in shadows you've never even seen? That question burned in Mitchell's mind long after the briefing ended. The maps, the dots, the chilling precision of threats laid bare across the West Coast. None of it was theoretical. None of it felt like the countless what-if scenarios he'd been fed during training. This was real. This was happening. And the civilian consultant who had been sitting quietly on a bench was no longer a puzzle. She was the axis everything now turned on. That night sleep didn't come. He sat at his desk, flipping through classified files Director Williams had unlocked for his eyes only. Photos of ordinary people, teachers, small business owners, engineers. But beneath their suburban smiles were connections to something darker, encrypted messages, overseas transfers, unusual travel patterns. Not zealots screaming ideology, but calm, calculating operatives embedded inside neighborhoods. The kind of enemy who didn't wave flags or plant obvious bombs. The kind who wore the same clothes as your neighbors and disappeared into the same rush-hour traffic. When dawn finally cracked the horizon, Sarah was already waiting for him. She wore the same tactical clothes, but this time there was something else. A holster at her hip, a sidearm. Mitchell's chest tightened at the sight. She carried it with familiarity, not like someone newly issued a weapon. The way her hand brushed near it, the casual weight of her step. This was a woman who had trained with firearms, who had lived with them long enough that they had become an extension of her body. The men noticed, they always did. The murmurs grew louder. "She's armed now." "Sir, with respect, who the hell is she?" Mitchell silenced them with a glance, but he felt the same storm inside. As they walked toward the secure briefing room, Sarah turned to him. Her eyes carried that same burden he had seen from the beginning, but now layered with urgency. "I know you've been patient," she said, "but before you put your men's lives in my hands, you need to understand what I've done." They stepped inside, where Director Williams and several analysts waited. A screen flickered to life behind Sarah, the map of the world dotted with red markers. "For the past 8 years," Sarah began, her voice steady, "I've worked as part of a civilian intelligence network. We go where traditional forces cannot. We embed. We live inside the worlds of those who would tear this country apart, for months, years, if necessary." Images shifted across the screen, urban apartments, suburban schools, corporate offices. "My background includes 3 years inside domestic extremist groups, 2 years within foreign corporate espionage networks, and the last 18 months," she paused, her throat tightening almost imperceptibly. "The last 18 months I've lived among the very people planning what you saw on those maps." The room fell into silence. Mitchell studied her, every instinct balancing between skepticism and reluctant belief. "You've been inside their network?" he asked. Her nod was small, measured. "I've attended their meetings, shared their meals, smiled when they spoke about death counts as if they were numbers on a ledger. They trust me, enough to let me near, not enough to reveal their final plans. That's where you come in." Director Williams stepped forward. "Commander, Sarah's access is our only way in, but she can't stop them alone. Your men bring tactical precision. She brings infiltration. Together, you can prevent a catastrophe." The word hung in the air, catastrophe. Mitchell's eyes moved back to Sarah. He thought of his men, laughing in the barracks, faces young enough to still believe in invincibility. He thought of the maps, red dots stretching across cities filled with innocents who didn't even know their lives were balancing on a blade's edge. And then he thought of Sarah, quiet, patient, waiting without explanation until the moment required her to speak. "What you're asking," he said finally, his voice low, "is trust beyond protocol, beyond reason." Sarah stepped closer, her gaze steady. "I know, and I won't pretend it isn't dangerous. If they discover me, I'm dead. If you act too soon, the operation collapses. If you hesitate, thousands die. That's the equation." Her bluntness hit harder than any classified report. He exhaled slowly. "So what do you need from me?" "Everything," she said simply. The weight of that word pressed on him for the rest of the day. Through drills, through debriefs, through the moments where his men asked silent questions with their eyes that he couldn't answer. Late that night, as the base quieted, Mitchell found Sarah alone near the obstacle course. The floodlights cast long shadows across the wooden beams and ropes. She was sitting again, but this time the silence wasn't passive. It was heavy. "You carry it too, don't you?" he asked, his voice softer now. Her head lifted slowly. "Carry what?" "The weight of decisions, of people who didn't make it back." For a moment her mask cracked. The flicker of grief in her eyes was raw, unguarded. "Yes," she whispered, "and I don't talk about it, not because I can't, Because if I start, I won't stop. Mitchell nodded. He understood too well. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was recognition. Finally, she said, when this begins, I'll need you to trust me faster than you trust your own instincts, even when it doesn't make sense. Mitchell looked at her in the pale light, at the weight she carried, at the courage it took to carry it in silence. And something inside him shifted. Then start with this, he said. Slowly, deliberately, he unholstered his sidearm, held it out to her. Her eyes widened slightly. What are you doing? Trusting you completely. For the first time since he had met her, Sarah Chen looked shaken. She took the weapon with steady hands, her fingers wrapping around the grip like someone who had done it 1,000 times before. She checked the safety, the magazine, the chamber. Not a novice, not a civilian. And as she held it, her shoulders straightened. The weapon wasn't just steel. It was acknowledgement, it was respect, it was trust given form. Thank you, she said quietly. Her voice didn't waver, but something softer slipped into her tone, something that sounded like relief. Mitchell watched her scan the shadows with new purpose, not as an observer anymore, not as an outsider, but as someone stepping into the fight. In that moment, he knew the line had been crossed. Whatever came next, she wasn't just a consultant, she was part of the team. But deep inside, another thought lingered, quiet, dangerous. If I'm wrong about her, it won't just be my mistake. It will cost everything. How do you prepare for a mission when you don't even know if it will exist tomorrow? That question gnawed at Mitchell as he read the encrypted message flashing across his secure terminal at 400 hours. Credible intelligence indicates imminent threat to West Coast targets. Civilian assets may be critical to response. Continue trust protocols with maximum priority. He had seen urgent communications before, but this one carried something colder. It wasn't just urgency, it was inevitability. When he stepped outside into the icy dawn air, Sarah was already waiting. But she was different. No longer the quiet woman in jeans and a ponytail. She wore dark tactical pants, fitted shirt, hair pulled tight, an earpiece tucked discreetly into place. At her hip, the sidearm he'd given her rested naturally, like it had always belonged there. Mitchell's men noticed. They always did. Eyes tracked her as she crossed the yard, whispers coiled between them. But Sarah ignored it all. Her attention was on him. There's been a development, she said, her voice steady but urgent. I've been cleared to share more, but only if you're willing to take responsibility for what comes next. Mitchell's jaw tightened. What responsibility? She gestured toward a secure building on the far side of the base. Walk with me. Inside, the world shifted again. Gone were the drills, the obstacle courses, the familiar grit of military life. Instead, the room hummed with technology, screens displaying live intelligence, analysts murmuring over streams of encrypted data, red markers flashing across maps of California, Oregon, Washington. A woman with steel-gray hair stood at the center, waiting. Her presence carried authority without effort. Commander Mitchell, she said. Director Williams, thank you for your cooperation. Mitchell stood straighter, instincts alert. Williams gestured toward the glowing maps. What you're looking at is the most advanced domestic threat analysis ever undertaken. A terrorist cell embedded in American suburbs. Not zealots in caves. Not enemies with flags. Engineers, teachers, business owners, citizens. People who look like neighbors but who are planning to kill thousands. Sarah moved beside her, pointing to clusters of red markers circling major population centers. These aren't random. They've been chosen for maximum psychological impact. Shopping centers, metro hubs, medical facilities. They want to break the idea of safety itself. Mitchell studied the maps, his tactical brain clicking through possibilities. You're talking about deep cover operations, civilian environments. That's not SEAL territory. Exactly, Williams said. That's why we need a new approach. Military precision combined with civilian infiltration. You've been chosen because your men trust you, and because you're already beginning to trust her." Her gaze slid toward Sarah. Mitchell's chest tightened. He had known, deep down, that everything was building toward this, but hearing it out loud, framed so clearly, it felt like stepping across a line that could never be crossed back. "How long do I have to decide?" he asked. "Less than you'd like," Williams replied. "Intelligence suggests they're moving into final planning stages." The room pressed in around him. His men's lives, thousands of civilians, and one civilian operative who had asked for his trust without explanation. As they walked out, Sarah placed a hand lightly on his arm. "I know what you're thinking, that this isn't your fight, that you're being dragged into something you don't control." "You're right," he said, his voice low. "But it is your fight," she replied softly. "Because when it begins, it won't be about who signed the orders. It will be about who's willing to act." Her hand lingered for just a second longer, then fell away. That night Mitchell sat alone in the briefing room, files spread across the table. Photos, reports, names that meant nothing and everything. He thought of his men, Rodriguez, Lopez, Carter, young Morales who still wrote letters home on actual paper. He thought of the families behind them. And then he thought of the maps, red dots burning against the coastline. When Sarah arrived at dawn, carrying coffee in one hand and determination in the other, he was waiting. "I've made my decision," he told her. She studied him carefully, and, "We'll move forward, but first I need to know exactly who I'm trusting." For the first time Sarah smiled, a real smile. "I was wondering when you'd ask." Inside the secure room, with Director Williams and several analysts watching, Sarah began to speak, not in riddles, not in fragments, but with clarity. "For years, I've lived among threats most people can't imagine. I've eaten at their tables, laughed at their jokes, learned to mirror their fears until they believed I was one of them. That's how infiltration works. You disappear into their world until you forget where yours ended." The screen behind her filled with images, suburban houses, office cubicles, cafes crowded with ordinary faces. "For 18 months I've been inside this cell's periphery, close enough to see their operations, not close enough to know their final plan. They trust me just enough, and that's our leverage." Mitchell leaned forward. "You're telling me you've lived among them for a year and a half." "Longer," she admitted. "But yes, enough that if I push too hard they'll suspect, enough that if I don't they'll carry out attacks we may never stop." The room went silent. Her words weren't dramatic, they were worse, they were matter of fact. Director Williams broke the silence. "This is where your team comes in, Commander. Sarah can get inside their final planning meeting, but she cannot stop them, not alone. We need tactical specialists ready to act the moment she signals." Mitchell stared at Sarah. "If they discover you." "They'll kill me," she finished, her voice calm. "Yes, I know, but if we don't act, thousands die. That's not a choice, that's reality." Her steadiness unsettled him more than any threat, because she wasn't fearless. He could see the fear behind her eyes. She had simply learned to live with it. Mitchell nodded slowly. "Then we prepare together." Later, as they walked across the tarmac in silence, Sarah glanced at him. "There's something you should know," she said. "What's that?" "When this begins, you'll have to trust my word over your training, over your instinct, over everything you've built your career on." Mitchell looked at her, the weight of his sidearm suddenly heavy at his hip. He remembered placing it in her hands the night before. He remembered the way she'd held it, not as a burden, but as something earned. "I already started," he said quietly. For a moment she said nothing. Then her eyes softened just slightly. "Good, because the time for waiting is almost over." "What do you do when the call comes at 3 in the morning, and every second afterward feels like history shifting beneath your feet?" Mitchell was jolted awake by the secure comms device buzzing against his nightstand. Sarah's voice, low but urgent, filled the dark. They've moved up the timeline, she whispered. Final meeting is happening now. I'm being taken to a location I don't recognize. I'm transmitting GPS coordinates. The attack is planned for tomorrow morning, rush hour. That was all he needed. He was already on his feet, pulling gear from its place, strapping on his vest, boots hitting the floor with practiced rhythm. Outside, the base came alive with sirens, lights, engines. His men knew what that signal meant. No drill, no exercise, real. Within minutes, vehicles tore through the pre-dawn dark, carrying SEAL Team Alpha toward the coordinates. Gravel kicked up in their headlights, rifles gleamed under faint moonlight, radios buzzed with clipped instructions. Inside Mitchell's vehicle, Sarah's voice came steady through the comms. He could hear faint background noise, muffled conversations in multiple languages, the scrape of heavy equipment, the thud of crates being moved. I count at least 12 inside, she whispered. They have building plans, timing schedules, and enough explosives to level several city blocks. Target confirmed. Central Metro Station. Morning commuter rush. Mitchell's stomach tightened. 50,000 people pass through Central Station every morning. An attack there wouldn't just kill thousands, it would scar the nation. Sarah, he said quietly into the device, we need details, locations of the explosives, security measures, anything. Silence, then her voice again, even softer. I'm going to try to volunteer for a final security check. If they let me, I'll get access to the materials. Too dangerous. I don't have a choice. Her voice cut out for several seconds. When it returned, she was moving deeper into the building. Mitchell could hear every sound, the scuff of boots, the low hum of generators, the shifting tone of men planning destruction like architects. At the warehouse perimeter, Rodriguez's voice crackled in Mitchell's ear. Sir, we have eyes on multiple structures, possible escape routes in every direction. We can surround, but without specifics we risk them scattering into the city. Mitchell's mind raced. If they left, the city would be a battlefield by dawn. If they hit too soon, Sarah would be caught in the crossfire or executed. Through the device, Sarah's voice returned. I'm in their equipment room. Multiple vehicles, all loaded with explosives. Backup plans confirmed, secondary targets at the university and the medical center. They're planning coordinated detonations to overwhelm emergency response. Mitchell closed his eyes for half a second. This wasn't one attack. It was a chain of them, designed to break the system itself. How much time? He asked. They're leaving in 30 minutes, she whispered. Separate teams. Radio silence until detonation. If we don't stop them here, we lose everything. Decision time. The kind that carved scars into commanders. All teams prepare for immediate tactical assault, Mitchell ordered, his voice calm even as his chest hammered. We move with limited intel, high civilian risk, but we cannot let them leave this building. His men moved, silent and sure. Breach charges placed, entry points covered, hearts steady because hesitation killed faster than bullets. Then it happened. Mitchell froze as Sarah's voice changed. Casual, conversational. She was speaking to someone in the room, which meant she'd been approached, which meant she could no longer speak freely. Rodriguez, Mitchell said into the radio, his tone sharp. We're going in blind, she's compromised. The breach detonated, flashbangs thundered, shouts erupted inside the warehouse. The chaos of controlled violence filled the air, gunfire snapping, boots pounding, commands shouted through smoke and confusion. Mitchell's men moved like water, clearing rooms, neutralizing threats. Explosives stacked in crates loomed like shadows of what could have been. Terrorists fought back hard, disciplined, well-trained, not the reckless amateurs he'd seen overseas. These men had prepared for this moment. And somewhere inside that chaos, Sarah was fighting to survive. Mitchell stormed into the main warehouse floor, weapon raised. The sight froze him. Sarah, zip-tied to a chair, her face pale but steady. Around her, the terrorist leaders shouted orders, preparing to execute her while their men scrambled for escape. "Commander," she called out, her voice fierce. "The detonators, they're remote. They can trigger from anywhere." Mitchell's gut clenched. Neutralizing the men here wasn't enough. Unless they secured those devices, the city would still burn. He moved fast, his team cutting through the remaining fighters. Rodriguez covered his flank, Lopez grabbed the crates, Carter secured prisoners. The warehouse floor became a storm of motion, gunfire, shouts, the thud of bodies hitting concrete. Mitchell reached Sarah, cut her bindings, pulled her to her feet. Her wrists were raw, but her eyes blazed. "There are still 2 missing," she said quickly, scanning the room. "The leader and his comms specialist. They have the master detonators. If they escape, the bombs still go off." Mitchell's chest heaved. The mission wasn't over, it had only shifted. Then, without hesitation, he did something that surprised even himself. He pulled his sidearm from its holster and pressed it into her hands. Her eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Trusting you again." For a second, Sarah looked at the weapon, her expression unreadable. Then her fingers curled around it with practiced ease. She checked the safety, the magazine, the chamber, movements crisp, certain. The steel in her hand wasn't just a gun. It was trust made tangible, a silent contract written in weight and steel. "There were 2 who left before you breached," she said, scanning the room with sharp focus. "They'll head for fallback positions. I know where they'll go." Mitchell's men were still clearing. Explosives still needed to be secured, but Sarah's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "They'll try to watch the chaos they created. They'll want sight lines to the city, somewhere familiar, somewhere they've prepared." Mitchell's instincts told him to keep her out of the fight, but instincts had brought them this far, and hers had proven sharper. "Then you're coming with us," he said. For the first time since he'd met her, Sarah's lips curved into something that wasn't exactly a smile, but close enough to be its shadow. "Then let's finish this." The mission wasn't over. The real battle was just beginning. How do you chase an enemy who hides in plain sight? An enemy who looks like anyone, anywhere? That question haunted Mitchell as his men secured the warehouse. Crates of explosives were stacked high, enough to tear through city blocks. Terrorists lay zip-tied on the ground, weapons kicked aside. But the victory rang hollow, because 2 had slipped away, and those 2 carried everything that mattered. "The detonators are still out there," Sarah said, her voice steady as she scanned the captured maps and laptops spread across the planning table. "Without them, all of this is useless. With them, the city still burns." Mitchell watched her, the sidearm he had given her still firm in her grip. She didn't hold it like a civilian. She held it like someone who had lived with danger long enough to make survival second nature. His men noticed too. Their glances carried questions, doubts, but no one spoke them out loud. Rodriguez approached, his radio buzzing. "Commander, EOD is en route, but Sarah's right. We've confirmed devices planted at the primary targets, sophisticated builds wired with failsafes. They'll blow if tampered with. We need those codes." Sarah moved closer to the table, her finger tracing the red lines that connected possible fallback points. "They'll want high ground, somewhere they can see both Central Station and the university, somewhere they can watch their chaos unfold. They mentioned it before, in passing. An apartment tower downtown. One of them's been renting a unit there for over a year." Mitchell leaned in. "You're certain?" "As certain as anyone can be with men like this," she said quietly. "I've studied their habits, their pride. They won't run blind. They'll go where they can savor control." Mitchell made the call. "Rodriguez, secure the warehouse with a holding unit. Lopez, Morales, Carter, you're with me. Small team, fast and quiet. Sarah comes too." His second-in-command frowned. "Sir, with respect, bringing her into the field." Mitchell didn't hesitate. "She knows their minds, we don't, she comes." Sarah didn't flinch. She only holstered the sidearm, her jaw set. The drive into the city was tense. Streets blurred past, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. Civilians were waking, going about routines with no idea how close death had come. Families packed into cars. Commuters waited for buses. Couples walked dogs on sidewalks that might not exist tomorrow if they failed. Inside the vehicle, silence pressed heavy. Rodriguez checked gear. Morales tapped his knee nervously. Lopez muttered a quiet prayer. And Sarah sat still, her hands folded, her eyes fixed on the city skyline rising ahead. Mitchell finally broke the silence. You've lived among them for years. How do you sit with that? Knowing the faces, the voices, knowing you smiled at people who planned this. Sarah's eyes flicked toward him, her expression unreadable. Because sometimes pretending is the only way to stop them, and sometimes silence is the only armor you have. The vehicle slowed near the Target building, a high-rise apartment complex overlooking both the station and the university. Ordinary on the outside, glass windows glinting, neon from a nearby diner reflecting in the early light. People inside sipping coffee, scrolling phones, living lives unaware of the war about to pass through their hallways. Mitchell's gut tightened. Civilian environment, every move would have to be surgical. No loud breaches, no stray rounds. One mistake here would collapse everything. They parked in the shadows of a side street. The team dismounted, weapons low, eyes sharp. Sarah stood beside them, scanning the windows. Her voice was calm, but her words cut clean. They'll be on the 10th floor, corner unit. They like angles of sight they need to see. Mitchell nodded, trusting her instinct. Rodriguez, Morales, front stairwell. Lopez, you're with me. Sarah, stay tight. Quiet entry, no mistakes. The climb was tense, boots soft on the concrete stairs, breaths measured. On the 8th floor, a door creaked open. A man in a robe stepped out, startled at the sight of rifles. Mitchell raised a finger to his lips, the universal command for silence. The man froze, eyes wide, then retreated quickly into his apartment. 10th floor. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit, doors closed. The corner unit loomed like a shadow at the end. Sarah's whisper broke the silence. They'll expect you to come fast. Hard, don't. They'll have the front covered, we go side. Mitchell met her eyes. She wasn't guessing, she knew. He adjusted instantly. Rodriguez, hold the front. Lopez, Morales with me. Sarah, guide. They circled to a side service corridor, narrow and dusty, ending at a maintenance door leading into the unit's kitchen. Sarah paused, listening. Muffled voices bled through, calm, controlled, planning even now. They're still here, she whispered. 2 of them and the detonator cases. Mitchell signaled. Lopez placed a breaching charge, small and precise. At the nod it blew, a flash of noise, then the team flooded in. The room exploded into motion. The comms specialist whipped up a pistol, firing wild. Lopez dropped him before he cleared the kitchen. The leader bolted for the living room, detonator case in hand, shouting into a phone. Mitchell pursued, Sarah right behind him, sidearm raised steady. The leader spun, weapon drawn. For a moment time slowed, the kind of moment soldiers remembered for life. His barrel aimed at Mitchell. Mitchell's rifle rose in response, but Sarah moved first. 2 shots, clean and sharp. The leader crumpled, the case slipping from his grasp. Silence crashed down, breaths heavy, hearts pounding. Sarah stood frozen, the sidearm still steady in her hands. For the first time the mask slipped just slightly. Her chest rose and fell faster now. Her jaw clenched. Mitchell stepped forward, kicking the weapon aside, securing the case. He looked at her, not as a civilian, not as a consultant, but as someone who had just crossed a line alongside them. You saved my life, he said quietly. Her eyes flicked to his. No, I saved the mission, that's what matters. But he saw it, the tremor in her hand, the crack in her calm. She wasn't unshaken. She had simply learned to carry the quake inside. Rodriguez entered, reporting quick. Building secure, 2 captured, detonator cases recovered, codes intact. Bomb teams are moving now. Relief washed over the room, but it was thin. The danger wasn't gone. The bombs still had to be defused. Lives still hung in balance. Mitchell looked at Sarah, the weight of what had just happened pressing into his chest. He had trusted her with his sidearm, trusted her to guide them. And when it mattered most, she had acted, not with hesitation but with clarity. But the cost was visible in her eyes. "Sarah," he said softly, so only she could hear, "you don't have to carry it alone anymore." For the first time her lips trembled, not a smile, not grief, but something in between. "I've always carried it alone," she whispered. "That's how I survived." Outside, sirens wailed in the distance as bomb teams converged on the city. The operation wasn't finished, but something had shifted. Sarah was no longer the silent outsider. She was part of them now, blooded, tested, trusted. And Mitchell knew with a heavy certainty that the real war wasn't just against terrorists. It was inside, the war of what silence cost and what trust demanded. What do you feel when the explosions don't come? When silence itself feels louder than any detonation could have been? Mitchell stood on the roof of the apartment tower, headset pressed to his ear as the reports came in. One by one, bomb teams moving through Central Station, university grounds, the medical center. His men's intel, Sarah's guidance, the captured codes, they had given the specialists a fighting chance. But a fighting chance wasn't a guarantee. Team Bravo confirms first device neutralized. A voice crackled through the line. Central Station is secure. Mitchell exhaled slowly, his jaw tight. Seconds dragged. Minutes stretched. Radios hissed static. The city below moved on unaware, commuters spilling onto streets, buses weaving through traffic, neon signs flickering to life as morning routines began. Ordinary life teetering above catastrophe, saved only by men and women moving unseen in shadows. University device secured, safe. Mitchell closed his eyes. Relief came sharp, almost painful. Then silence again, too long this time, too heavy. Sarah stood near the edge of the roof, her sidearm holstered now, her arms wrapped tightly across her chest as if holding herself together. She stared at the city, eyes glassy, lips pressed thin. The steel she had carried for days now seemed to tremble, as if cracks were finally showing. When the third confirmation came, medical center device, felt his knees weaken just slightly. He steadied himself, but inside the weight lifted. Thousands of lives had been spared. The mission was technically a success, but success never came clean. He turned to Sarah. "It's over." Her head moved faintly, a slow shake. "No, it never is." Mitchell stepped closer. "You saved them, all of them. You put yourself inside their world for years. You gave us this chance. That matters." Her eyes lifted to his, sharp with unshed emotion. "And how many times do I have to do it again? How many faces do I have to smile at, knowing what they're planning? How many more mornings will I sit in silence while people look through me, wondering why I exist?" Her voice cracked, just barely, but it was enough to cut through him. For the first time, Sarah Chen wasn't the silent operative, the calm observer, the unshaken infiltrator. She was human, and she was breaking. Mitchell didn't speak immediately. He had learned, through years of command, that sometimes silence was the only gift you could give someone holding themselves together. Finally, he said quietly, "You carried it alone because no one else could, but that doesn't mean you have to keep carrying it alone." Her arms tightened around herself. "If I let it out, it won't stop." "Then let it bleed," he replied, his voice soft but certain. "Better here now than when you're standing in front of men who will kill you for blinking wrong." Her breath shuddered. For a moment he thought she might finally collapse under the weight, but then, slowly, she straightened, her mask piecing itself back together, not because the pain had vanished, but because she refused to let it own her. She looked back at the city, the rising sun painting glass towers in gold. "They'll rebuild," she murmured. "Not the terrorists, the shadows. There's always another cell, another face. I know it, you know it. This was just one. Mitchell joined her at the edge, his gaze sweeping over the skyline. You're right, but today you stopped them. That's what matters. Silence stretched. This time not heavy, not hostile, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after storms, when the air still smells of smoke but the sky begins to clear. Rodriguez approached, sweat streaking his face, gear slung heavy on his shoulders. Sir, bomb teams confirm all devices neutralized. 0 civilian casualties. Mitchell nodded once. Good work. Rodriguez's eyes flicked to Sarah. His expression softened just slightly with something like respect. He didn't speak it out loud, but it was there. The team regrouped in the vehicles. Civilians in the streets walked past unaware, sipping coffee, checking phones, stepping over cracks in sidewalks that had nearly been graves. On the ride back, Mitchell studied Sarah. She sat rigid, eyes forward, silent as ever. But now he understood that silence differently. It wasn't distance. It was armor, armor that had protected her but at a cost. He thought of his men, young and old, each carrying their own weight. He thought of himself, the decisions he had made that would haunt him for years. And he thought of Sarah, whose burden was heavier still, because hers was chosen in secrecy, carried in shadows, and born without the comfort of camaraderie. When they reached the base, the sun was high. Normalcy returned quickly. Trucks moved. Orders were shouted. The smell of coffee and dust filled the air. But beneath it all was the hum of something new, an unspoken acknowledgement that the world had changed. In the debriefing room, Director Williams stood waiting. Screens flickered with live reports, media headlines beginning to spin fragments of truth into half-understood narratives. Suspicious activity disrupted. Authorities investigating. City safe. The public would never know how close they had come. Williams' gaze moved from Mitchell to Sarah. Well done. The codes, the intelligence, the capture, you prevented a catastrophe. Sarah's reply was quiet, almost hollow, until the next one. Williams studied her but didn't argue. She only nodded. Get some rest, both of you. Debriefing continues tomorrow. Mitchell and Sarah stepped out into the light. For a moment, neither spoke. Soldiers moved past them, carrying rifles, laughing, living. Life went on. It always did. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. Do you ever wonder if trust is just another word for risk? Mitchell looked at her, the question heavy between them. Maybe, but sometimes risk is the only way forward. Her eyes lingered on his, unreadable, then shifted away. As she walked ahead of him, her figure framed against the sunlight, Mitchell felt the weight settle deeper in his chest. This wasn't the end of her story. Not the end of his. This was only a chapter in something larger, something darker, something that would demand more trust, more sacrifice, more silence. And he wondered, not for the first time, how long a person could carry silence before it consumed them. What remains after the danger passes? When the dust settles, the guns are holstered, and silence is all that's left. Mitchell sat alone in the barracks that night, the glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows across scattered reports. The mission logs lay open, but he couldn't read them. His eyes drifted over the words, yet his mind wandered elsewhere, to the sounds, the faces, the moments that had already begun replaying like ghosts. The shouts in the warehouse, Sarah's voice whispering through static, the echo of her shots in the apartment, saving his life before he could even raise his rifle. The way her hands had trembled afterward, not from inexperience, but from the unbearable weight of having to do it again. Command would call the operation a success. The headlines would bury the truth under vague language, terrorist plot disrupted, officials investigating, public not at risk. People would sip their morning coffee, rush to work, kiss their children goodbye, never knowing how close the day had come to shattering. And maybe that was the point. But success never erased the cost. It only disguised it. There was a knock at the door, quiet, hesitant. Mitchell rose, opened it. Sarah stood there, a shadow in the dim corridor, her hair loose for the first time since he'd met her. No earpiece, no sidearm visible, just her. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. He stepped aside. She entered, eyes scanning the room as if searching for words hidden in the air. Finally, she spoke. "I wanted to thank you for trusting me." Mitchell studied her. "I didn't have a choice." "You did," she replied. Her voice carried no accusation, just truth. "You could have kept me at a distance. You could have dismissed me as a risk. You didn't." He leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "Because I saw something. In your eyes. The same thing I've seen in the mirror after missions that broke me. I knew you weren't just an outsider. You were already carrying the fight." Her lips parted, then closed again. For a moment, silence pressed between them. Not the heavy, defensive silence she wore like armor. A different kind. A fragile quiet, the kind that comes when words finally feel possible. "I've been doing this for years," she said. "Living inside lies. Smiling when men talked about death. Pretending to belong. And every time I came back to the surface, it was harder to remember who I was. Harder to breathe. That's what silence does. It saves you. And it kills you." Mitchell's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her he understood, that he had seen men crushed not by bullets but by the weight of what they never spoke. He wanted to tell her that silence was the heaviest uniform they ever wore, but he didn't, because she already knew. Instead, he said, "You don't have to do it alone anymore." Her eyes lifted to his, shimmering with something unspoken. For the first time since she'd arrived, her expression softened. Vulnerability flickered across her face, as fleeting as a shadow but just as real. "Maybe," she whispered, "but people like me, we don't stop. There will always be another cell, another mission, another silence." She stepped toward him, stopping just close enough for her words to carry. "But I'll remember this, that for once someone trusted me before I earned it, and that trust saved lives." She turned then, moving toward the door. Her hand lingered on the frame, fingers curling slightly as if holding onto something invisible. Then she was gone, footsteps fatting down the corridor. Mitchell sat back at his desk, the silence returning. But it felt different now. Not heavy, not hostile, just present, like a reminder that some battles never end, even when the gunfire stops. The next morning the base returned to routine. Recruits shouted through obstacle courses. Trucks rolled across gravel. Orders barked, radios crackled. Life moved forward because it had to. Sarah stood near the gate, her small bag slung over her shoulder. The black sedan waited, engine humming, driver expressionless behind dark glasses. She wore no tactical gear today. No weapon. Just a simple jacket, her hair falling loose against her shoulders. Mitchell approached. She turned to face him, her gaze steady but softer than before. "So this is it?" he asked. "For now," she replied. "Where will you go?" She gave a faint smile. "Wherever the silence takes me." He wanted to ask her to stay, to train with them, to walk away from the shadows she kept disappearing into. But he knew better. People like Sarah didn't get to walk away. Not because they couldn't, but because the world wouldn't let them. "Whatever comes next," Mitchell said, his voice firm, "if you need me, you'll have my trust. Always." For a moment, her eyes softened again, the faintest flicker of warmth breaking through. Then she nodded, turned, and stepped into the waiting car. The sedan rolled forward, blending into the ordinary hum of traffic outside the gates. Mitchell stood there, watching until it vanished. Then he turned back toward the base, toward his men, toward the weight of command that never lifted. As the sun rose high above, casting light across the grounds, he thought of Sarah Chen, her silence, her strength, her breaking, and her resilience. And he understood something he had never put into words before. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand to be seen. Sometimes dignity simply waits in silence. Until the moment comes when trust is the only weapon that matters.